I introduce myself typically at conferences. I'm the guy that's done everything. I'm an ex-cop, I'm an ex-firefighter, I'm an ex-horse dentist. No, I'm not joking. I was a blacksmith at a historical village. I was a cop. I did video surveillance in everything from prisons to Vegas casinos, Newark Airport, Lower Manhattan Surveillance Initiative. I've done video analytics, so I've taken video streams and played with them and made them do interesting things, made them do things that their designers didn't think were possible. Information security, I was a senior information security analyst at the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. I've been all over, I've done all sorts of cool stuff, and a lot of times I realize the most important issue is that people still think that physical and information security are different. They're not. They're the exact same thing. And everybody's going, he's stupid. No, honest, I'm serious. Let me ask you a question. Who here has a server room or servers in a locked closet or room somewhere, right? Just about everybody, or why are you here? Okay? Is there a lock? I mentioned locked closet, right? If I can walk up and break into that lock with a bobby pin and a ruler and MacGyver my way in there with some lock picks, can I own your server? Anybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. That's physical security, protecting information. Isn't that information security? Okay. How about your video surveillance? Your video surveillance is sending IP video stream, that's packets, over RJ45 to a storage area network because one camera can do 6 megs of video per second, easy. So I'm now in the storage area network, but it's video from the physical, wait, that's information security. There's no difference, people. It's all the same. So I keep walking around, and this is what I evangelize on. I hate that term, but it works. Physical and information security are the exact same thing. And if you ignore any pieces of it, it's going to bite you in the ass. Just that simple. So let me ask you a question. Who here has had to deal with your physical security people when they go, oh, by the way, we need 7 terabytes starting tomorrow? Or your information security people when they go, oh, hey, you know, those locks are, it's an XP box that does our badges and it's on the network and it's not patched. Has anybody run into anything like that? Has anybody ever here done a pen test on a place where you go, what is that XP box? And it's the badged server, that kind of thing? Happens all the time. And startups, because this is about startups, have the same problems. Because they walk in, they're like, oh, the building gives us swipe cards. That's awesome, it's part of the rent, it's cheap. And I go, great, who else has those cards? When did you audit the database? Huh? And it drives me nuts, but you get the idea. So these are issues that I talk about. I also talk about forensics. Because people are like, oh, video surveillance, you don't need to do forensics on it. Yes, you do. Has the video been altered? Well, I'm probably running out of my 3 minutes, so I'll shut up quickly. But any questions you have about physical security and information security, and especially where they converge, hit me up.
So the idea basically is you have a 3-legged stool when you're looking at information security, and the 3-legged stool falls when one of those legs breaks. And that is personnel security, which obviously ClearanceJobs focuses on their people, the physical security, and then the actual computer security, if you will. And all of those have to work together in some sort of blend to mitigate risk. And depending on what you're trying to protect, from who, for how long, there's regulators, auditors, Russian cybercrime, APT, you might have heard that.
Drink.
So, drink. You have to tailor those 3 together and figure out what makes sense. And startups obviously are funded possibly organically, funded, you know, here's $50 million from a big fund, might be a spin-off of a mega global corp. It just depends on what you're able to leverage. And we'll talk about that in a second here. I'll introduce Deborah Salons. She's an attorney practicing with a focus on telecommunications, cloud, and information security and privacy law. So she has a JD and also a CIPP, so a Certified Information Privacy Professional. And she works with folks from government affairs. She's a fellow on the Future Privacy Forum and a national board director for Alliance for Women in Media. So she's done a lot of work with telecom and spectrum rebanding, all the way to working with folks that are promoting women in media. media, and Mobile Citizen Summit. He's a speaker at Interop, and actually a speaker at DEF CON as well, a big hacker conference in Vegas. So you don't usually see lawyers working with hacker groups, and I think that's something that's a positive development, where an event by hacker groups, I mean hacker conferences for white hats, not obviously. So very privileged to hear from someone who has a little bit of a foot in both those worlds, and it's usually either or. So a great resource for you. Definitely get her card afterwards. And I'm just going to talk now about the emergence of privacy and security in the digital world.
Thank you. Hi everyone, as all said, I'm Deborah Salons. Unfortunately, I don't have as an exciting background as Josh does. I did not go to vet dental school or horse dental, whatever you had to go to. I went to law school. I'm probably legal advice today. We're just going to be talking legal information, so this is my disclaimer, and anything I say is my opinion, and it has nothing to do with the opinion of my clients. So that being said, so we're here today to talk about information security. And the security of your information, and usually the information that you have is personally identifiable information or sensitive personal information about either your employees or your customers. And when you have that kind of information, that triggers privacy laws. The adage is you can have security without privacy, but you can't have privacy without security. So, security is the how and the privacy is the what. So, for many businesses, collecting this is crucial to your business because, you might be a social media company, you might be wondering obviously you want to know what your customers are doing and what they're up to. So, that's great, but there's just some legal responsibilities that can be tied to that. So, I think, some of you are involved in startups, and I'm sure some of you are in corporations. So I'm sure that there is kind of a balance. If you're a technical person, the legal team comes in and they could be kind of the no people. Or vice versa. I don't know how much interaction you guys have all had with lawyers, but from a startup perspective, I think a lot of startups we have a squeaky thing back here. A lot of startups, you think about the corporate paperwork and the funding, in terms of legal perspective. But a huge thing that you also have to think about with under the legal umbrella is privacy, and the reason why is there's a whole bunch of bad things that can happen to you. So for instance, there are civil penalties, and they can be per incident or per violation. So for instance, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, if you were to violate that act, it's $1,000 per incident. If you have 2,000 people on a list, that's 2,000 times 1,000. It adds up very quickly. It's like eating potato chips. Just doesn't stop. So you have to be careful. There's enforcement actions, obviously, by regulatory bodies. There's private lawsuits that you can get from individuals. There are criminal penalties with HIPAA and FCRA. People can go to jail. And last but not least, a PR nightmare. I mean, we're all very aware of social media. I think everyone in this room is very aware of social media, and you just don't want to have bad things going on Twitter and whatnot. I think that's a new thing that companies have to actually be aware of that wasn't around 5 years ago. So baseline, you really need to know your landscape. Who are you? Are you a data collector? Are you a processor? Are you a service provider? Knowing who you are in relation to the legal landscape, it provides a good foundation for you to kind of see what regulations affect you. Also, understand what your existing contract liability is, if you have SLAs, if you have contracts with your clients, if you have a site policy. I mean, all of these, provide some of the legal foundation for your startup. And finally, what laws and regulations apply to you. That goes with your jurisdiction, that goes with your industry. If you're, health industry, finance, obviously there are different laws that relate to different industries. So there are several landmines that you can fall on when you're dealing with data collection, and the one thing that I've been working on is big data and the law, and big data is a new phenomenon, and there's great things that you can do with data and collection of data and analyzing it, but you really have to look at every step in the big data supply chain, so to speak, because at each step there are different legal red flags and legal problems that could come up. So for instance, I have a whole thing, but I can't talk about all this in 3 minutes. But like for instance, in collection, like in just the collection of the data, your privacy policy on your website is a huge, can be a huge problem. You have to have one. I mean, it's a best practice. But if you're not following what you're doing in your privacy policy, the Federal Trade Commission can come after you for unfair trade practices. So, you know, you set that policy, you need to make sure that you're following it. That's a big hole that people jump into. Also, when you first collect data, opt-in or opt-out, there are certain kinds of data that you need to provide those options to your customers. So that's one thing also you have to look at. What kind of information are you collecting? Are you collecting health, financial, CP&I, which is customer proprietary network information, human resources? All of these things might fall into, these types of information fall into certain categories, and they're regulated by different bodies. And the problem with privacy law is that there isn't one agency that you go to for privacy. It is throughout the entire government. And there are also state laws and international laws. So it's really a cornucopia of laws, 'tis the season. So you really have to be aware of where you are and where you stand in the landscape. And then there's also storage issues other than collection. Like, where are you storing the information? This comes up a lot with cloud computing, data sovereignty issues, especially with the EU. You know, with the EU, the Europeans actually look at privacy as a human right, whereas we look at it as more of a consumer protection. So if you're going to do business with the EU, you might have to go through the Department of Commerce to get a safe harbor stamp of approval so that the EU knows that you have certain privacy, that you're implementing certain privacy policies and considerations into your business. Security breaches are another huge thing, which I think these guys can talk a lot to. There are 48 different security breach notification laws across the country, and that's with state laws. There's 48 different ones. So, and the differences aren't just, oh, if I have a breach, I have 30 days versus 60 days versus 90 days to tell, you know, whoever was violated, but it could be the type of data, it could be the type of notice. I mean, this can get very, very, very complicated.
Penalties too.
And penalties are all different too. A new thing that's just come out, the SEC has given out guidance that publicly traded companies need to report if they've had a data breach and what they're doing to protect their company. That was guidance that came out in October, a year ago. And so, I mean, startups aren't necessarily publicly traded, but this is something to keep in mind, that the feds are actually looking at this, and if hopefully your startup becomes a publicly traded company one day, and you know, you need to know about this stuff. So, you know, implementing good policies from the get-go is a good practice. So overall, you know, when you're ready to go, I say go talk to legal counsel. It's worth it before, you know, you hit the ground running. I know lawyers can be expensive. Yes, we are expensive, but it seriously will be worth it down the line, because you can have a lot of penalties and you really want to start your business on the right track. And before I hand it over, I just want to mention too that there are really some great resources on both the FTC and the FCC websites for startups. On the FTC website, there's a lot of information about privacy policies, industry-specific guidance. I saw some guidance today for app developers, which I thought was very interesting. And there's information on privacy and security. And on the FCC, Federal Communications website, they have a cybersecurity initiative for small businesses. And they do have a one-sheet on cybersecurity tips for small businesses, but what I thought was very interesting is they have the Cyber Planner 2.0. And basically it's a tool to create a customized cybersecurity plan. So you put in the name of your company, you pick the things that you want, and you hit enter, and it comes out with this whole professional-looking privacy and security policy, cybersecurity policy. I think it's a great tool for startups. So I will hand it over to everyone else. Thank you for listening.
Did she breathe?
I thought I heard a gasp.
At $400 an hour, you don't want her to breathe.
Yeah, I'm trained.
Very good. When I was dealing with a lawyer at $5.35 an hour out in McLean, he was talking really slow for my taste. I appreciate that. Introducing Tom Stamoulis. Tom, his formal title is Regional Director, East and Central U.S. Global Security Solutions at Terramark, which is now a Verizon company. Terramark is considered a high-end secure cloud and colo company. as a cybersecurity professional. He has 25 years of experience in information security, as well as a retired U.S. Army counterintelligence veteran. So Tom can speak to some of the concerns that are certainly above my expertise in terms of being in the cleared space, as well as working with commercial and federal unclassified work. So Tom is also government trained in Arabic, and he can help you with various regulations and industry frameworks like ISO 27002, SOX 404, COBIT, PCI, NIST, and FISMA, among others. And he's very good at identifying high-risk processes and working with C-level people to really figure out how to blend the right financial, human, and technical resources together. Tom, take it away.
Thank you. I don't know about you guys, but after all that shock and awe, I think we should talk about on how to become a horse dentist. Because you think about it.
It haunts me, I swear.
It does.
I need some work.
And I was kind of considering how I wanted to approach this evening. And it's interesting, and I don't need you to raise your hands, but think about if you've been in a brand new relationship and kind of mirror that to a startup. In a brand new relationship, everything's perfect. Everything is, but now think about why those relationships, the ones that didn't work, why they didn't work. There's usually something
It's all her
that you.
fault.
It's always her fault. Yes, that's true.
Come on, guys.
But if you think about that, there was a fundamental thing that was not in place for that relationship to continue to be successful. Same thing goes for a new business. When you have this great idea, the first thing you think about is, all right, how can we get this great idea to market? And your investors or your partners, they're thinking the same way. How are we going to get this out? How are we going to make money? Because that's why you start a business. It's to make money.
No.
It is. It is. There's the heckler. Okay.
Tom is a greedy capitalist.
No, I mean, think about it. You start the Red Cross to help to do good. You start a business. You start Google, Facebook to make money. Well, and then of course meet women on your Facebook. That's where I started. He just realized he could make money after that. So there's fundamental controls, unfortunately, that you have to address. And if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all right, when you look at that, what? Trust me, I'll tie this in for you. You'll see what I'm
It's
saying.
different for horses, though.
It is different for horses. But if you're not, there's 5 levels that Maslow says in order for you that you must achieve in order to get to the next level. There's basic tenets in each level, or you can't get to that next level. And so the top one is self-actualization. And basically it states that if you're struggling to find food or shelter, there's no way that you can get to self-actualization. The same thing goes in a company or a network. There are fundamental controls in a network. And I'll talk to people all the time, and I'm like, what's your biggest concern? And they'll say, I want to deal with the risk. And I'll say, okay. And we'll talk about it. And then we'll find out that they have no idea what they have for assets. They don't know where their networks connect to the internet. They don't know which networks are connecting to partners. So if you think about it that way, look at it as 3 levels. There's your physical infrastructure that you want to address that has all of your assets. If you don't know what you own, you can't address your risk. And I'm sorry I'm laughing because I think about all my clients that come up to me. And then you'll have in between that, you'll have compliance. And anyone here in the DC area deals with compliance. If you are a startup and you want to work for the government, you better know FISMA. All right? FISMA is compliance. But once again, you can't achieve compliance if you aren't comfortable or you don't know what assets you have. So the controls that you'll also deal with a lot of people that will, and I said there are some people from Deloitte here. You don't have to raise your hands, but they called you out. I used to work for KPMG, and we used to go in and we'd talk to a client and we'd assess them. And you'll have 2 elements of a control. There's the test of design and the test of effectiveness. Having a policy only does not mean that the control is managed, because that just means you have a policy, and that's called the test of design. You pass that. But then the next question is that policy effective? Do you have proper procedures in place that can ensure that what you spent all that time and money writing is actually being used throughout your organization? So you have to have controls in place to assess the effectiveness of that control. Everything, passwords, anything that you have to deal with. So when you're dealing with a startup, and I have a lot of problems with information security or networks as a whole, because what's amazing is whether you're building a single family home or a 60-story building, you have to build it on a foundation. And that foundation has to apply or has to comply with certain codes. Because if you build a 60-story building and it falls, you're going to be held accountable. However, in our environment or in our industry, people aren't provided those fundamentals on how to build a network. You walk into one organization, their network looks one way. You walk into another organization, they're completely different. There's no real foundation, which makes it very difficult for those of you who either operate networks, deal with networks, or secure those networks, how you can manage that. It's a big challenge. And I have my own personal feelings is that we should have a standard where if you're going to build a network, these are the minimum requirements that all networks have to have in place in order for it to be, and it would make it a lot easier for your auditors to come in and assess it because at least they have a guide. There really, unfortunately, is no guide today. So when you're building out your organization, or even in your organization today, it's really important that you understand what you have. If you don't understand what you have, there's no way that you're going to be able to meet your compliance, and there's definitely no way that you're going to be able to address risk. Because kind of like looking at doing a budget. Nobody wants to do a budget. You don't want to know how much money you have coming in and how much money you actually have going out. Because once you do, most of us get depressed. And then we sit there and say, okay, well, I need to cut out this, I need to cut out that in order for balance. Same thing you deal with your network. You have to know what you have in place in order to make sure that it's properly secure.
Thanks, Tom. To riff on that, I've done some work with startups as an information security consultant, and as well as with some of the larger companies out there in the Fortune space. And it is amazing that a lot of people, like what Tom said, don't really understand the kind of information they have, and sometimes they think they do, but they actually don't. So if you look at the aggregation, storage used to be very expensive, bandwidth used to be very expensive, and today, because storage and bandwidth are so cheap and ubiquitous, I think it's actually in some cases a detriment to security and privacy, because there's really no cost to storing stuff you don't even need anymore, not to mention that you're actually utilizing on a daily basis for running your business and for making a profit. So the thing that you're looking at is figuring out what kind of information am I collecting, like Deborah said, what kind of information am I collecting, what am I going to be collecting it for, how is this being used for my business, and when will I stop collecting it, and when will I stop aggregating it and hoarding it? And in some cases, that may be never. But if that's the answer, you need to understand that the more information you hoard, while the storage costs are certainly getting cheaper, the penalties for a breach or for some problem associated with that hoarding are actually going through the roof. So we have this paradox where storage and bandwidth costs for collecting this stuff are going to the floor, the penalty is going to the roof, and that gap is going to be widening forever, honestly. So those are some of the business level thought processes you have to go through. In some cases, we're talking about HR records. We see people collecting massive amounts of information about employees, even employees that have not been working there for literally decades, and they still have that in the live HR database. This is not a good idea. Take that information that is not being utilized and not being acted upon in any way. They're not on active payroll, they're not live application that you're
But they're
working
still
on.
an Active Directory.
They're probably an Active Directory with admin privileges, which is part of the problem as well. This basic identity management. Who's in your network at what level of privilege? What is their role?
And when you get rid of it, make sure you get rid of it properly.
Get rid of it properly.
Because you can get in trouble by just, throwing documents in a trash can without
Yep.
shredding them, to simplify the matter.
Right. There are
Hard
ways.
drives go in trash cans, right? I mean, that's all you need to do.
Well, 800,000 medical records just the other day. South Shore Hospital out of Boston was missing 800,000 records because they were actually in the process of destroying them and gave them to a third-party destruction company. And in the process, the third-party destruction company said, "We're not sure where those went." So some of them we destroyed, but some of them we didn't. And as legal people will tell you, you probably want to pull that contract and figure out what are the indemnifications and SLAs and guarantees and warranties and various recitations that were incorporated into that contract for destruction.
You talked about the third parties, and look, the economy has been horrible for the last few years, and companies are constantly looking at ways to save money. And a lot of times they'll talk about outsourcing. We used to do our records management, now we outsource it. We used to do our data centers, now we're going to outsource it and we're going to go to Amazon Web Services, or we're going to go to Terramark, all right? Where they're, because that's all we do. So therefore, of course, we're going to do it for less than what most companies can do it for. There's a couple things that you really need to keep in mind, and I like giving people little short things that they can take back to their managers when they start talking about this. You can delegate, but you can't abdicate responsibility. All right, and think about that for a minute. Just because you outsource that, all right, you're still ultimately responsible. It is not going to be Terramark's name in the Wall Street Journal if there's a breach. It's going to be your name because it's your records. Even though we're hosting it, and I'm not saying that we're really good at that, but I'm just saying anybody, if you think about it, the hospital, and if you actually read the article, or if you had the opportunity to read the article, it mentioned the Weymouth Hospital. It never mentioned the name of the third-party organization that they outsourced it to. So that's who's going to end up on the Wall Street Journal. So when your organizations, you think about some of these organizations, some of these financial institutions, I don't care who you work for, you spend hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars building your reputation. It's very important to you that your reputation stays in place. And it can get damaged very quickly if you aren't doing the right thing. So just think about that when your managers say, hey, well, we're going to outsource this. And think about, oh my God, okay, fine, let's do that, but what are the ramifications? The other thing is when you cut budget, the first thing that goes is security. Right? It's automatically the first thing that goes is security. Ask your management, what do you think our third party is cutting first before we opt it out to them? They're most likely cutting security as well, because it's everybody's organizations that's going to cut security. So if you're outsourcing something because security's has been cut, they're cutting security too. So how well are they doing something that you are doing? So these are some of the things, higher level things that people, that a lot of managers that are thinking about bottom line don't necessarily think about when they're talking about the data that you're actually protecting.
And to that, you want to look at right to audit. Ask them under NDA if you can, in some cases, get a tour of the data center with a security consultant, or if they have some sort of statement of controls. And there are various ways to audit that. There are different standards that the data center folks and the cloud folks even are working on with Cloud Security Alliance to do the cloud controls matrix. So they'll submit to some version of a third-party audit from that, and then give you their most recent results, and you have some sort of reasonable right to audit. You can't tie up their security people every day for the rest of the year, but there's some sort of visibility and transparency there. And actually, from my discovery with some of the cloud vendors, Terramark is actually one of the better ones in terms of, hey, this is how we do it, and this is what we do, and this is why we have the kind of clientele we have. So there's a reason why that company is considered on the high end of the security in the government world, is because they allow people to take a look at what they've built and the kind of partnerships that they put in place, the kind of people that they have looking at the speeds and feeds of the logs and the various detection and prevention mechanisms.
I'm gonna grab what they both said and riff on that as well. If you're old enough, like me, you remember the outsourcing in the 90s, mostly to India, And you remember all the problems we had back then, and it was abdicating responsibility because, oh, I pay them less than I pay my guys, and they take it for me, and I don't have to worry about it. Not so much. And it's the same thing when we go to the cloud. You know, you still are responsible for your data. They're taking responsibility for the operational control. They're taking responsibility for a lot of the administrative, because they do it on a volume scale. They do it in massive industrial quantities that I'm not going to do it in. It's cheaper for them, and I get a price break, and that's great. But I still have to have right to audit. I still have to have visibility. I still have to have transparency. I still have to have responsibility. And that's incredibly important. And sometimes it gets all kinds of fun with the legal profession. I'm throwing it back at you. If anybody saw the latest thing with Mega Upload, and I did not prep her with this case, so forgive me. If she gives it this frantic look, she'll beat on me. But if anybody saw the latest thing in the Mega Upload case with Kim.com, dear God, I hate that name. The government went in, there's a guy named Goodwin who they went in and read his data and admitted to reading his data out of the Mega Upload servers so that they could tell him that it was copyrighted or not and throw his case out the window. And he's like, wait, you didn't ask. And like, oh, no, you gave up your rights to it because it's a third party. It's like, oh God, don't open that can of worms. Because with law firms, I'll throw it back at law firms, there's practice management software in the cloud. Your lawsuit against him, just because he's sitting there, we all know about him, is in their practice management software in Terramark, and
being accessed from my iPad at my house that my kid also plays on.
Who owns that data and who has the rights to look at that data? And yeah, we're not going to go there. Okay.
Or if you put it in Amazon, you don't even necessarily know where the data is.
Correct.
Could be
Right.
in China, and
Maybe not China, but it could be
There's
just
Amazon data.
And that can be a huge
Could be.
problem with the type of data that you're holding, because you know, as this is ClearanceJobs, and I'm sure everyone from the government knows better than I do. You don't want to be storing sensitive information in other countries, and you want to know where things are, and that the cloud is I mean, as convenient as it can be. You have to, it's hard to identify where your data is, and that's what a lot of the European Union Data Privacy Initiative is talking about, because you don't necessarily know where your data is when you go into a cloud, and a lot of European countries just want their information within their country. So, I mean, as much as the cloud is great, and you think that it's borderless and it can go around the world, the laws still provide borders to these things. So, I mean, it's a big tension, but it's something that you have to consider depending on the type of data and some of the restrictions that you're working with.
And a lot of countries won't go to the cloud because of the fact that we have the Patriot Act. Mm-hmm. And if that data from a foreign country is on a server in the United States, the federal government does have the ability to take that data or view that data without even telling that foreign country. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge, and I'm not saying whether the Patriot Act is good or bad, all right? It has positives and negatives. Right?
Don't start.
The heckler will jump in on that. But it's a business decision that a lot of countries are making as a result of the fact that they're not sure. Now, at the same time though, there's no guarantee that that cloud provider could even tell the federal government where that data is at that time. Yeah. All right, they may not. They might be able to tell a portion of it. They don't know if it's here now, and by the time the government asks for it, it's been moved to someplace else. So there's a lot of fluid motion in that, but it's still a concern for countries and for companies that want their lawyers to kind of work as that firewall, that human firewall, so when the federal government does come in and says, we want to look at this data, the lawyers can fight it, but if it's in the cloud, the lawyers don't even get notified. So there's a lot of things that you gotta, everything that's shiny on the outside, you gotta think about, how shiny is it, and just use your common sense.
There are new models coming out, like Spyro, for example, and I'm not compensated to say this, but Spyro, for example, has been called out as one of the more secure and private. In many cases you have security, but you don't have necessarily the privacy, because just because you have security doesn't mean you can tell the feds to go away if they have the paperwork. Or in some cases there may not even be a necessity for paperwork. So privacy and security again go together. So you're looking at Spyro has a zero knowledge privacy model. So you have the keys, it encrypts your data at your computer and then sends it out to the cloud, and they don't have access to it. So if the feds or hackers come calling on their cloud, then they're getting a random bucket of bits. And this is not necessarily new, but it's certainly on the consumer level now to have a more of enterprise level, Spider Blue, is that kind of model is being implemented for very cheap, and I suggest that I use it personally. So there are people that are smart and technically proficient that are addressing some of these problems. CipherCloud is working on Gmail encryption, for example. Check out their video. It's pretty cool stuff. Again, not compensated for naming these companies. But these are some of the things that I research for startups that want to leverage the cloud. And by the way, Google has a government cloud basically that is resident in the US. It's designed for the federal government. Department of Interior just went 90,000 seats for Google Apps. This is happening today. 2 years ago, if you'd have told me that Department of Interior would just ship their email to Google, I would have laughed in your face and just never thought you were a credible person. I never. We can't really talk professional stuff anymore.
Anybody from the Department of Interior here today?
But it's already done. These things are happening, and we can't stop it. So cloud's not going away. BYOD is not going away. All these things are not going away. What you have to do is, if you're a startup and you're being innovative, find other people that are innovative and understand the emerging technologies and how they work together to create the privacy and security that is possible in many cases. But again, it comes down to figuring out what's your business model and back to what's important to you. So if you have whether 3,000 desktops or 30 desktops, understand what those desktops are accessing, what's being stored on them. Is there a particular piece of intellectual property, source code, enabling information if you're in pharmaceutical development, whatever that may be. So someone's investing tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in your intellectual property development. If you treat that intellectual property as the rest of the data, and someone steals it from you, again, not a lawyer, but the DOJ might not even consider that an intellectual property theft because you didn't implement the right policies, procedures, and awareness and other classification around that data. It's just like the other data. So if I'm working for him and I steal his stuff, and he says, hey, DOJ, I want you to prosecute that straw hat loser, he stole my stuff, I'll say, well, where's the contract that I signed that said it was different from any other data? What other controls were there on that data? Right? So you can go to DOJ website, I'll get you the link. They have a checklist for prosecuting intellectual property crime. And they want to know, how is that data different than the marketing data that you put on your website? If it's not significantly treated differently, you're probably not going to have a case. And again, these are things that are at the management level decision making. It's not about bits and bytes necessarily.